Her in-laws offered a lady of 30 and her baby for sale, the smell of dust and sweat mingling in the burning air, when the warrior man stood and said, "I'll take them." Maggie's chest constricted as her eyes darted across the creaking wooden platform where townsfolk leaned forward, eyes glinting like predatory crows. The auctioneer's voice rasped, hawking her and the child as if they were sacks of grain, and her stomach twisted. The heat of the sun made the air shimmer above the dirt road, and she could feel the coarse wind whipping her hair into her eyes. Little Tommy whimpered against her chest, clutching the frayed edge of her dress, unaware of the cruelty swirling around them. The crowd laughed, some with excitement, some with cruel anticipation. Maggie could smell the stale sweat of men who spent their lives riding cattle and wielding revolvers, mingled with the faint metallic tang of gunpowder from a nearby saloon. She swallowed hard, fighting the urge to tremble, but her hands shook. Regardless, she wrapped herself tighter around Tommy, wishing desperately that the world could vanish in a single blink. Then, a figure moved forward from the shadows of the crowd. He was tall, impossibly broad, and his presence seemed to bend the air around him. Long black hair fell over his bronze shoulders, glinting in the fading sunlight. Tribal jewelry clinked softly against his chest, silver and turquoise catching the last rays of the dying day. His eyes, sharp and unflinching, swept over the crowd with a predator's calm certainty. "I'll take them," he said. His voice was low, resonant, carrying over the murmurs and laughter, slicing through the tension like a blade. The auctioneer froze, a bead of sweat tracing down his temple. The crowd hesitated, unsure whether to cheer, curse, or flee. Maggie stared at him, heart pounding so fiercely she thought Tommy might wake. Who was this man? What power, what audacity made him step forward in a town where even the law turned? Blind eyes to cruelty? She could smell smoke and leather on him, mixed with the faint scent of pine and earth, as if he had walked from the wilderness itself. "Are you serious?" the auctioneer demanded, voice trembling, though his eyes were hard, calculating. "You can't just—" "You don't. I said I'll take them," the warrior repeated, each word deliberate, unyielding. His eyes now settled on Maggie, and for the first time she felt seen, truly seen, not as merchandise or a thing to be bartered, but as a human being, fragile yet defiant. The townsfolk muttered, voices rising into an uneasy chorus. Some whispered about the warrior's origins, about old legends and fears tied to his name. Others simply scoffed, unwilling to believe a stranger could challenge the established order of greed and cruelty. Dust swirled underfoot, catching the last golden light, and for a moment, the world seemed suspended between sun and shadow, between hope and despair. Maggie's fingers tightened around Tommy's tiny arm. Could she trust him? Could anyone be trusted after the horror she'd endured at her in-laws' hands? The baby stirred in her arms, his soft whimpers a reminder of her responsibility, a tiny life entirely dependent on her choices in this merciless world. The auctioneer's gavel lifted, the air crackling with tension. Sweat dripped down Maggie's brow, mixing with the dust that clung to her skin. And still, the warrior man, tall, resolute, impossibly fearless, stood before them like a sentinel, a promise of salvation in the midst of cruelty. "Fine." The auctioneer snapped finally, voice tight with frustration. "He's yours. Take them." Maggie blinked, hardly believing it. The warrior stepped forward, his movements fluid and deliberate. He extended a hand toward her, and in that simple gesture, he offered something she had not felt in years: safety, protection, and perhaps, just perhaps, a chance at freedom. As he led them off the platform, the crowd's laughter faded behind them, replaced by the whisper of the wind through the town's wooden streets. Maggie clutched Tommy close, heart racing, senses alert to every sound: the scrape of boots on dirt, the creak of the wagon's wheels, the faint rustle of wind through the nearby trees. The world beyond the auction house was unknown, wild, and dangerous, but with this warrior, this stranger from shadows and legend, she felt a spark of hope she had long thought dead, and somewhere deep in her chest a quiet, fearful anticipation stirred. The journey had only just begun. Dust rose like a golden haze as Takoda guided the horses along the cracked dirt road, each hoofbeat drumming against Maggie's chest like a warning. Her arms ached from holding Tommy, who was now murmuring softly in his sleep, the baby small. Body pressed against hers as though sensing the peril around them. The auction house's rough wooden walls shrank behind them, swallowed by the vastness of the desert that stretched endlessly in every direction. The sun blazed overhead, beating down on Maggie's shoulders, turning her hair into a tangled, burning halo. She tasted grit in her mouth, her tongue parched from the wind whipping through the canyon-like streets they had left behind. The scent of horses, leather, and smoke clung to Takoda. He moved with a predator's precision, eyes scanning the horizon, muscles rippling under bronzed skin, beaded armbands and necklaces catching the dying sunlight. Maggie could hardly believe such a man could exist outside the pages of legends or the whispered stories of the old tribes. "They'll come for us," he said suddenly, voice low, almost a growl against the wind, "and they'll not stop until they have what they think is theirs." Maggie's stomach sank. Who are you really?" she asked, her voice trembling as she shifted Tommy closer to her chest. "Why save us?" He didn't answer at first. His eyes remained fixed on the horizon, sharp and unblinking, as if reading some hidden map only he could see. "I have lost too much," he finally said, voice almost a whisper, carried by the wind. "I will not watch another life be sold into misery. You deserve a chance." The words were strange and beautiful to Maggie's ears. She had been treated like property for as long as she could remember, sold, traded, and disregarded. The idea that someone might risk everything to protect her and her son seemed impossible. Yet here he was, a living shadow of the wilderness itself, moving with a grace and certainty that defied reason. As they rode deeper into the desert, the town's wooden buildings became nothing more than splintered shapes in the shimmering heat. Maggie felt the earth beneath them vibrate with life, the subtle hum of the desert wind through rocks and sand like a whisper of ancient spirits. Tommy stirred, eyes opening to the wide expanse, the tiny fingers grasping at her dress, and Maggie realized that survival depended not only on distance but on learning the land's secret rhythms, something Takoda seemed born to understand. Night fell quickly. The desert cooled and the stars pricked the sky like silver knives. Takoda slowed the horses near a dry riverbed, the shadows of jagged cliffs stretching across the sand. He guided Maggie to a small copse of mesquite and juniper trees, the scent of sage and pine heavy in the cool night air. The baby's breathing evened out as Takoda laid out a makeshift blanket for her to rest on. "Stay close," he murmured, his eyes scanning the darkened landscape. "The night is quiet, but it is not safe. Coyotes, outlaws, men who care nothing for life, all watch." Maggie nodded, shivering, both from the chill and the awareness of how precarious their freedom was. She watched Takoda as he settled beside her, the fire of his gaze reflecting in the tiny campfire they managed to start. Sparks drifted upward into the night sky, mingling with the stars, and she felt a strange mix of fear and awe. "I don't even know your name," she said softly, breaking the silence, unsure if speaking was safe. "Takoda," he replied, the word rolling from his tongue like a low wind over the desert plains. "It means friend, protector." Maggie swallowed. Friend, protector. Could she believe in such things after everything she had endured? Yet in the quiet night, with Tommy sleeping softly against her chest, she found herself wanting to believe. She watched Takoda's shadow stretch across the sand, tall and unwavering, and a small, fragile hope stirred in her chest. In the distance, a coyote's howl echoed across the desert, a haunting reminder of the dangers that lay ahead. But for the first time in years, Maggie allowed herself a fleeting thought. Maybe, just maybe, the world could still hold kindness. Takoda's gaze swept the horizon one last time before he sat beside her, back straight and alert. "Sleep now," he whispered. "The desert watches over those who respect it. Learn its ways, and it will protect you." Maggie wrapped Tommy tighter against her, listening to the crackle of the fire, the whisper of wind, and the subtle rhythm of Takoda's breathing. Somewhere deep in the desert night, a journey had begun, a journey not just of escape, but of survival, trust, and the fragile possibility of hope. Night had settled over the desert like a heavy velvet cloak, dotted with stars that twinkled coldly against the ink-black sky. The wind whispered through the mesquite and juniper trees, carrying the scent of sage and dry earth. Maggie huddled closer to the small campfire, wrapping Tommy tightly in a worn blanket, his small breaths warm against her chest. Sparks leapt into the air, fading like fireflies, and shadows danced across the sand and rocks, making the desert feel alive and dangerous. Takoda knelt beside the fire, his long black hair falling over bronzed shoulders, chest bare and glistening faintly from sweat and dust, tribal necklaces and armbands glinting in the firelight. Every movement he made was fluid, controlled, as if the desert itself had trained him. Maggie's pulse quickened as she watched him, not from fear, but from awe. There was a power in him that seemed almost elemental, as though he belonged to the land more than any human had a right to. After a long pause, she finally spoke, voice barely above the crackle of flames. "Why? Why save us?" Her words trembled with uncertainty. "Why risk yourself for strangers like me and a baby?" Takoda's eyes didn't leave the fire. His jaw tightened, and for a moment, the desert wind carried nothing but silence. Then, slowly, he spoke, low and deliberate, like a chant passed through generations. "I have lost too much," he said. "I have seen lives wasted for gold, for pride, for nothing. I will not stand by and let that happen again. Not to you. Not to him." Maggie stared at him, swallowing hard. She wanted to believe him, wanted to feel that warmth of protection, but fear had taught her caution. "You don't even know us," she whispered. "You don't know what we've been through, or what we're capable of." He looked at her. Then, eyes like dark pools reflecting the firelight, steady and unflinching. "I know enough," he replied. "Enough to see that you deserve more than the cruelty of men who trade in lives. Enough to know that survival isn't just about distance, it's about the people you protect, and the courage you carry inside." Maggie's fingers tightened around Tommy. His tiny hands curled against her, and she realized the depth of her fear, not just for herself, but for the life she had sworn to protect. She wanted to ask him more, to know everything about the man who had stepped into her nightmare and turned it into something resembling hope. Yet the words stuck in her throat, drowned by the crackle of the fire and the vast, indifferent desert around them. Takoda pushed himself to his feet, brushing sand from his legs, and moved toward the edge of the camp. He scanned the horizon with the precision of a hunter, muscles flexing under bronzed skin, armlets and necklaces catching the moonlight. "The world is full of men who wish to take," he said quietly, "and you will face them. You must be ready, for even here, even in this quiet, danger can find us." Maggie swallowed, her throat tight. How can I be ready?" "You watch," he said simply. "You listen. You learn the land's secrets. You trust, even when fear presses at your chest. The desert is alive, Maggie. It can shield you if you understand it, respect it, and move with it." Her eyes traced the jagged silhouettes of distant cliffs and rocky ridges, faintly silver in the starlight. The desert seemed to stretch endlessly, but for the first time she noticed its beauty: the rustling of leaves, the sighing wind, the soft gurgle of a distant stream. Survival would not be easy, but maybe it didn't have to be devoid of wonder. Hours passed. Takoda sat back down beside her, eyes scanning the dark horizon for threats only he could see. Maggie held Tommy close, feeling the warmth of her child against her chest and the steady presence of Takoda beside them. In that quiet moment, she realized that trust was not given lightly, but it could be earned. And perhaps in this vast wild desert, trust was all they had to cling to. Finally, exhaustion overtook her. She closed her eyes, listening to the whisper of wind, the crackle of fire, and the steady rhythm of Takoda's breathing. Somewhere beneath the stars, in a land both harsh and beautiful, a fragile bond had begun to form, a bond born of survival, courage, and the promise of protection in a world that had offered her so little. And in the stillness of the desert night, Maggie let herself imagine something she hadn't dared in years: hope. The sun had climbed to its zenith, painting the desert in blinding white light, when the first hoofbeats thundered across the dry plain. Maggie clutched Tommy to her chest, feeling the baby's small heart pounding against her own. Dust rose. In tall spirals ahead, betraying the approach of riders, men drawn by greed, rumors of the auction, and the promise of easy prey. Takoda's eyes narrowed, scanning the horizon. His chest rose and fell like a drum, muscles flexing beneath his bronzed skin, shirtless and adorned with tribal jewelry that shimmered in the harsh light. The wind tugged at his long black hair, whipping it into a dark, wild halo around his focused face. "Stay low," he murmured, voice calm but edged with steel. "Do not move unless I tell you." Maggie's stomach churned. She had never seen danger so close, so immediate. The riders drew nearer, their horses snorting, dust clawing at the dry air. Their guns glinted, pistols ready, eyes cold and unfeeling. For a fleeting moment, Maggie wished she could vanish into the sand beneath her feet. But Takoda was already moving, fluid and sure, as if the desert itself guided his every step. The first rider spurred forward, aiming directly for them. Takoda sprang into action, body a blur of motion, fists striking, feet pivoting. He disarmed the man with a strength that seemed impossible, twisting the gun from his hand and hurling the rider off his horse. Maggie's breath caught in her throat. Every movement was precise, deliberate, like watching a predator dance in the sunlight. A second rider charged. Takoda met him head-on, muscles rippling as he grappled, the sound of impact sharp against the quiet desert. Dust and sweat clung to his skin, his long black hair streaked with sand. Maggie clutched Tommy tighter, hiding behind a rocky outcrop, heart hammering. She could smell the acrid scent of gunpowder from the few shots fired, mingling with the earthy aroma of dust and sweat, and she shivered. The fight lasted only minutes, though it felt like hours. Takoda moved with the rhythm of the land, dodging, striking, disarming, until the riders were either fleeing or unconscious in the sand. His breathing was steady, controlled, as if the danger had been nothing more than an inconvenience. Maggie dared to exhale, relief flooding through her veins. When the dust finally settled, Takoda's eyes returned to her, dark and intense, softened only slightly by the faintest trace of a smile. "This is why I protect you," he said quietly. "Because the world will not, and because someone must." Maggie studied him, every scar, every muscle, every flicker of expression. She realized with a jolt that he was more than a warrior. He was the desert incarnate, a force both beautiful and terrifying, capable of shaping life and death with his hands. Tommy cooed softly, oblivious to the danger that had passed, and Maggie felt a flicker of hope stir inside her chest. Yet the desert was still alive, still watching. Takoda moved to check the horses, muscles flexing beneath bronzed skin, dust clinging to every inch. Maggie followed cautiously, eyes wide, sensing that their journey was far from over. They had survived this attack, yes, but the land was vast, and enemies could emerge from anywhere. Men who traded in fear, lawless bandits, or worse, her in-laws, relentless in their pursuit. By the time the sun began its slow descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in streaks of blood orange and gold, they had settled near a small canyon ridge. Takoda tended to their wounded horses while Maggie laid Tommy down on a makeshift blanket, brushing the dust from his hair. The baby slept soundly, unaware of the danger they had faced, and Maggie felt a mixture of awe and gratitude toward Takoda. "You fight like the land itself flows through you," she said softly, voice still trembling. He glanced at her briefly, the hint of a smile tugging at his lips. "The land teaches those who listen," he replied, "and it teaches harsh lessons. You will learn them too if you survive this journey." Maggie nodded, the weight of the day pressing down on her, yet a strange sense of connection settling over her. Takoda's presence was a shield, yes, but it was more than that. It was a promise. A promise that in a world that sought to destroy them, someone could still fight to keep them alive. As night fell over the desert, the horizon softened into deep purples and blues. Maggie held Tommy close, listening to the whispering wind and the distant cries of coyotes. She understood now that survival was not just about distance, but about courage, trust, and the fierce, unyielding strength of the man who had claimed them as his responsibility and perhaps as his own. The desert had become a palette of burnt golds and deep reds as the sun sank toward the horizon, streaking the sky with fire and blood. Takoda led them along a narrow, rocky path, the horses picking their way carefully among jagged stones. Maggie's legs ached, and she shifted Tommy in her arms, feeling the baby stir, sensing her own tension. The events of the high noon raid had left her exhausted, yet alive, and the memory of Takoda's feral strength lingered in her mind like a pulse she couldn't forget. Ahead, the path opened into a canyon, hidden like a secret whispered only to those who dared to look. Cliffs rose like silent guardians, their surfaces carved by centuries of wind and rain, shadows pooling in deep crevices. A narrow stream gurgled along the canyon floor, its water crystal clear, glinting like liquid silver in the late afternoon sun. Wildflowers clung stubbornly to cracks in the rock, a riot of purples, yellows, and reds against the muted stone. The air smelled of earth, water, and desert sage, a sharp contrast to the dust and smoke of the road they had left behind. "This place," Maggie breathed, awe catching her voice. "It's beautiful." Takoda's eyes swept the canyon with the precision of a hawk. Shirtless, bronzed, muscles taut, long black hair falling around his face, tribal jewelry glinting in the fading light, he dismounted first, his hands moving with care as he helped Maggie down. "It is more than beauty," he said quietly. "It is sanctuary. Few know it exists. Fewer still survive here if they do not respect it." Maggie followed him along the stream, marveling at the hidden life in this sheltered world. Birds darted between crags, their calls sharp against the lull of water, and tiny lizards scuttled across sun-warmed rocks. She could hear the distant howl of a coyote, a reminder that danger still lingered outside the canyon's protective walls. Yet here, it seemed, the desert had carved a pocket of safety, a refuge for those bold enough to find it. Takoda led them to a shallow cave hidden behind a curtain of hanging vines and wildflowers. Inside, the walls were painted with ancient tribal symbols, their ochre and charcoal lines telling stories of hunters, warriors, and the spirits of the land. The air smelled of stone and time, and Maggie felt a shiver of reverence as she stepped inside. "This land remembers," Takoda said, kneeling beside the fire he had built near the cave's mouth. "Those who honor it are protected. Those who exploit it are cast aside." Maggie set Tommy down gently on a makeshift blanket, smoothing the dust from his hair. His tiny fingers reached for hers, and she realized how fragile this life was. How much responsibility weighed on her shoulders. Do you really think we can stay here?" she asked, voice soft, almost afraid to believe the answer. Takoda studied the canyon walls, his profile sharp in the firelight. "I can protect you," he said, "but only as long as you listen, as long as you respect this place. The desert teaches harsh lessons, Maggie. You will learn them." She nodded slowly, the weight of the day pressing on her, but a strange calm settling into her chest. For the first time in months, perhaps years, she allowed herself to imagine life beyond the auction platform, beyond the cruel eyes of her in-laws, beyond the constant fear. She and Tommy might survive here. They might even thrive. Night descended fully, and the canyon transformed under the silver light of the moon. Shadows pooled in the crevices, and the whisper of wind through rocks sounded like a song of warning and protection intertwined. Maggie held Tommy close, listening to the water gurgle, the breeze sigh, and the steady, unshakable presence of Takoda beside them. In that hidden canyon, a fragile bond had begun to form, one built not just on survival, but on trust, respect, and the quiet promise of safety. Maggie realized that freedom was not only a matter of running from danger, but of finding a place where life could grow, where hope could take root, and where someone willing to fight for her existence could shape a future she had never dared to dream of. And as she watched Takoda patrol the canyon's edge, shirtless, muscular, and vigilant, jewelry catching the moonlight, she knew that whatever lay ahead, they had found a sanctuary worth defending and a protector she could finally begin to trust. The canyon had been a haven for weeks, yet the desert was never truly still. One night, lightning split the sky like a silver dagger, striking a distant ridge and igniting dry brush. The smell of smoke curled into the canyon, harsh and choking, and the flames danced hungrily across the edge of their sanctuary. Maggie woke with a start, Tommy stirring against her chest, frightened by the crackle and roar. Takoda was already moving, muscles taut and bronzed, shirtless, long black hair whipping in the wind, tribal jewelry catching flashes of firelight, his eyes scanning the blaze with the precision of a seasoned hunter. He barked instructions that cut through Maggie's panic. "Water! Grab buckets! Move!" Maggie stumbled to the stream, the cold water shocking her hands as she filled a crude container. The baby cried softly, and she pressed him to her chest, feeling the tiny warmth against her skin. Sparks hissed as they landed near the horses, and the smell of burning brush mixed with the iron tang of sweat and adrenaline. Maggie realized then that survival was a symphony of senses. Every sound, smell, and movement mattered. Takoda moved through the chaos like a force of nature, his body a blur of motion. One moment he was pulling a smoldering branch away from the horses, the next he was kicking embers from the sand, his bronzed skin glistening with sweat, muscles flexing with effortless power. The fire's orange glow reflected in his beaded necklaces and feathered armbands, making him look like a warrior from another age, something born from both legend and earth. Maggie followed as best she could, filling bucket after bucket and tossing water over flames, her hands blistering, her dress torn and streaked with soot. She marveled at the calm ferocity of Takoda. He did not panic. He did not hesitate. Every motion was precise, controlled, deliberate. And with every glance he threw toward her, she saw not just a protector, but a man who fought for them because they mattered. Hours passed. though it felt like an eternity. The fire threatened, then receded, the wind shifting and turning the blaze back on itself. Takoda's presence was a shield, a force she could rely on even when the desert seemed hell-bent on devouring them. Finally, the flame subsided, leaving smoke curling lazily into the night sky and scorched earth scattered across the canyon floor. Maggie sank to her knees, clutching Tommy tightly. Her hands were raw, her body exhausted, yet a thrill of awe and gratitude coursed through her. She looked at Takoda, his chest heaving slightly, hair matted with sweat, yet eyes sharp and vigilant. The firelight danced across his bronzed, muscular torso, highlighting the tribal jewelry that spoke of heritage and honor, and for the first time, Maggie truly saw him, not as a savior, not as a legend, but as a man who had chosen them. "You?" she began, voice hoarse. "You saved us again." Takoda knelt beside her, brushing soot from her hair. "We saved each other," he said softly, the words carrying weight beyond the immediate danger. "You have courage too, Maggie. Never forget that. Strength is not only muscle or skill, it is will and heart and knowing who you fight for." Maggie pressed Tommy against her chest, watching the baby yawn and drift back to sleep, and she felt a profound sense of connection to this warrior, to the land, and to the fragile, flickering hope they had built in this hidden canyon. The night air cooled, carrying the scent of scorched earth and sage, and for the first time she felt a calm she hadn't known in years. Takoda settled beside her, his vigilance softened now by quiet satisfaction. "Tomorrow," he said, voice low, almost a whisper, "we will strengthen the camp, find more water, prepare for whatever comes next. Danger will come, but we will be ready." Maggie nodded, realizing that in the vast wild desert, their survival depended not only on strength and cunning, but on the bonds forged in fire, trust, courage, and a connection that had grown through shared peril. She closed her eyes, letting the wind carry away the last remnants of panic, holding Tommy close and feeling the steady pulse of Takoda beside her. Somewhere in the quiet night, a lesson was being learned. Survival was not only about the land or skill, but about heart, about those willing to stand by you when the world burned. And in that moment, Maggie knew that, whatever lay ahead, they were no longer alone. The first light of dawn crept over the canyon's jagged edges, painting the cliffs in muted gold and soft pink. Maggie clutched Tommy close, his small hand wrapped around hers, as the distant sound of hoofbeats shattered the fragile morning. Calm, her stomach clenched. They had survived the auction, the desert, and the fire, but danger had returned, relentless, cruel, and determined. Takoda stood at the canyon's entrance, shirtless, bronzed, muscular, long black hair flowing. In the morning wind, tribal jewelry glinting against the rising sun, eyes fixed on the approaching riders. He was a sentinel, a living wall of strength, and Maggie felt a spark of courage ignite in her chest just by watching him. "Stay behind me," he said, voice low, steady, unyielding. "They will not harm you if I can stop them." The riders emerged over the ridge, grim-faced and armed, their leader a familiar figure, her in-laws, riding with twisted satisfaction and greedy eyes. The air seemed to thicken with tension, dust stirred by hooves mixing with the scent of sweat, leather, and early morning desert sage. Maggie's pulse raced. She could feel Tommy's tiny heartbeat against her chest, quick and erratic, mirroring her own fear. Takoda's muscles coiled, every sinew visible, tribal jewelry jingling softly with his movement as he stepped forward to meet them. "This ends now," he called, voice resonant across the canyon, carrying the authority of someone who had survived every hardship the desert could throw at him. Her in-laws laughed, but their mirth was hollow, brittle against Takoda's commanding presence. They did not know the man they faced, a warrior who had moved like wind and shadow, who had fought fires, bandits, and the unforgiving land to protect Maggie and Tommy. And now, he was a living barrier between them and the lives they sought to destroy. The lead-in-law raised a gun, but Takoda moved first, fluid as water, catching the barrel midair. The metallic clang of impact echoed against the canyon walls. The other riders surged forward, but Takoda met them with unyielding strength. Fists struck like hammers, boots kicked with precision, and every movement was a calculated display of power honed by the land itself. Dust and sand rose in clouds around him, his long black hair and bronze skin streaked with sweat and sunlight, tribal jewelry catching glints of the rising sun, a symbol of heritage and fearsome skill. Maggie felt a strange mixture of awe and terror as she watched. Each strike, each movement, was a promise kept that they would survive. Tommy nestled against her shoulder, lulled by the rhythm of battle and the reassuring presence of Takoda. For the first time in her life, she understood the depth of his commitment, the fierce loyalty that defined him. Minutes passed, though it felt like an eternity. When the dust finally settled, the riders lay disarmed and defeated, panting and beaten. Takoda stood tall, chest heaving, muscles taut but eyes calm, a sentinel against the cruelty that had once ruled Maggie's life. She stepped forward, tears streaking her dusty face, and held Tommy close. "You saved us," she whispered, voice trembling. "Again, you've given us everything." Takoda knelt beside them, brushing dust from her hair, his eyes softening for the first time in weeks. "No," he said gently. "You saved yourself and him. I only helped. Courage is not mine alone." The canyon seemed to exhale with them, the wind carrying away the last remnants of threat, filling the space with the scent of sage, stone, and the promise of life. Maggie realized that freedom was not just a matter of distance, but of having someone willing to stand for you, to fight for you, and to believe in your worth when the world would not dot as the sun climbed higher, painting the desert in radiant gold. Maggie held Tommy against her chest, watching Takoda patrol the edge of their hidden sanctuary. The bond forged in fire, struggle, and survival was unbreakable, and she knew, finally, that they were safe, for now, at least Dot, and for the first time, Maggie allowed herself to dream. She dreamed of days spent in peace, under the wide-open sky, in the canyon that had become their refuge. Of a life where fear no longer ruled, where trust and courage had carved a place for them in a harsh, indifferent world. She glanced at Takoda, shirtless, muscular, long black hair framing his face, tribal jewelry glinting like sunlight on bronze, and realized she was not just grateful, she was changed. The desert had given them trials, danger and fire, but it had also given them a protector, a sanctuary, and the chance to reclaim their lives. And together, they would face whatever lay beyond the canyon, strong, unbroken, and bound by something far deeper than fear, hope, survival, and the fierce love of a warrior who had chosen them as his own.